Hello there. My name's Brandon and I make pictures out of tiny squares. And earlier this month, I participated in the Game Boy Pixel Art Jam. And this is a yearly community event that's put on by the folks from GB Studio Central. And the way it works is that they announce a certain theme, and then everyone has 2 days to make a piece of Game Boy style art that's based on that idea. The twist for this year's event is that it was also a 1-bit edition, where you could only use black and white in your design. Which isn't really what you think of when thinking about Game Boy art, but at the same time, it's of course a style that's completely within the scope of what could be produced for the original Game Boy. So I'm up for the challenge. Now, this 1-bit idea, that's just the color restriction that we're working with, but the actual core theme for this event was the word balance. So whatever way you wanted to interpret that idea of balance into your piece, that's just left kind of completely up to you. And at first, I was kind of brainstorming along the lines of balance, like a physical balance of objects or some kind of mini game that had to do with balancing in some way. But I was feeling a bit unsure going forward with just that idea. And I put up this community post after the event started just to kind of check in with everyone about where their thoughts were on this theme. And I'm really glad that I did this because you guys gave a lot of great suggestions about where to go with this idea of balance. A lot of suggestions for the balance of good and evil, life and death, that sort of thing. Some great Thanos references, of course, and even some ancient Egyptian mythology about this idea called the weighing of the heart, which is like this judgment ceremony to determine whether or not someone is granted into the afterlife. So there's kind of a balancing theme to that as well. So where I landed from all these suggestions is that it inspired me to dust off an old character. This is an OC of mine called Grim Girl Hannah, and she's sort of this cute Grim Reaper kind of a character. Haven't really done anything with her for a few years now, but the subject matter here just felt kind of right to put her in my mind. So I'm planning this illustration of her, and in the background is going to be a heart that's divided into 2 halves to kind of do like a good side and a bad side. I started out with this as a rough sketch on paper, and that just let me figure out the overall layout for everything. And now I'm adapting that sketch idea into the pixel form. Now, my sort of bad habit with this kind of thing, as far as the actual pixeling, is that I tend to default a little bit too much to the 1 pixel brush, and maybe a little too much focus on the idea of having line work in place before anything else. And I would say when you're doing something larger and more illustrated like this, as opposed to, just a small game sprite or something, it's probably a better approach to use a larger brush size and kind of blob in everything as silhouettes and figure out what that flow is before getting too caught up in things like details and line work. But what you'll see me doing is kind of going a little bit back and forth on that sort of thing here as I just figure out exactly what workflow I'm trying to use for this one. Because this is a Game Boy piece, it's on a canvas size of 160 by 144 pixels. And these jam submissions, they're going to be collected as a Game Boy ROM and actually put on a real Game Boy cartridge as well. So we need to be aware of other hardware limitations at play for this. To my understanding, GB Studio is going to treat these artworks as a thing called background images, as opposed to them being like sprite assets that are able to be manipulated and layered and that sort of thing. And as part of that, our designs are limited to only being 192 unique tiles. So to check this tile count, we can use this web tool here, and I'll put a link for this in the description. And how this works is that you load in your image in its original scaling, its original size, and it'll give you the readout of just how many unique 8x8 tiles that's composed of. So we can see, so far I've got 116 unique tiles, and this heat map is showing how all of that breaks down, where these ones that are in the strongest red color are tiles that are only used once. Because these are background images and not sprites, unfortunately, they can't take advantage of things like tile rotations or reflections, creating more efficiency in that tile count. But at least in my case, I've got a lot of reuse of solid black and solid white tiles, so that's going to help to keep the tile count quite low so far. So for the heart detailing, like I was describing earlier, the approach here, keeping in line with that balance theme, is to do kind of a good side and a bad side. And one of the first decisions, of course, is just to figure out which side is going to be which part of that theme. And somehow I didn't really even put any thought into this in a good way. I just kind of went on autopilot, and instinctually, I guess it felt fitting enough to make the left side into the good one. And so that one's getting decorated up with lots of rounded shapes and fun shapes and imagery, kind of hearts and confetti and stuff like that. And for the other side, I'd already started this motif that had sort of these digital glitch effects going through the heart. So I carried on with that, almost thinking of it as this like corrupted computer virus kind of thing, and just experimenting with different dither patterns as the various glitch effects that could sort of fulfill that idea around that half of the heart. Another amazing community suggestion that I got for this jam, which is something I hadn't even been thinking about for this, but it's perfect, was to make this piece use an exact 50-50 split of black pixels and white pixels. And then that's like just the ultimate use of the idea of balance in the piece, right? So this is called the pixel color counter. And just like with the tile tool, we'll just load in our original image. And right here, we can just see that balance between the black and the white pixels. So right now there's a discrepancy of about 2,000 pixels between them. We've got more black than white being used, probably just from Hannah's design, of course. So we've got to go through now and find a lot of spots where we can introduce more white pixels into the design. So I'm doing things like adding an extra layer of thickness into parts that use like white outlines to them. We can also pop in some more detailing of the little bits of sprite work on that left side. And then on the right side, I'm going to try to introduce just a few more of those glitch effects with this checkerboard dither tile. As noticeable as these changes are for the artwork aspect though, they don't really account for the kind of magnitude of pixel balancing that we really need to see to make that equation work. We need to flip about 1,000 pixels to make that balance. So my final drastic measure here is to introduce this large sort of white vignette at the corner. Now, I never imagined this to be part of the original design intent, but I do think it's able to add an interesting flow to everything that wasn't there before. And, if it's what I need to do to cheese the pixel count, then hopefully that's just considered a win-win. So we can see now we're within about 100 pixels, which just means some minor edits here and there to really get that to perfectly balance. Unfortunately, though, we haven't checked that tile count in quite a while. And if we go over there, we're exceeding that limit of 192. Not by a whole lot, though. And this sort of cleanup just usually involves getting rid of some of those single-use dark red spots on the heat map, especially if it's just because there's a few stray pixels that kind of poke out into a new tile and they're not really actually adding that much. So I'm going to finish that cleanup and we'll go ahead and take a look at the final balanced image. All right, so there's the final version, and I feel like it came together with an interesting flow after having all these constraints to balance. It was also kind of fun to work with that challenge there. And just to show you the proof, here's the tile count, which I brought right up to that limit of 192. And here's the pixel count with a very satisfying balance of course, 11,520 pixels each. Now, because this is a community event, I've been poking around in the submissions, and I just wanted to share some other cool pieces that show all the fun interpretations of the theme and the constraints here. Starting with this one called Wizards of Balance, which I just thought had such a great style to it. There's something kind of gritty and organic about this type of artwork, and it's just really cool to achieve this in a Game Boy format, let alone a 1-bit style as well. Next is this Sun and Moon character piece, and the neat thing here is how these two characters blend into one another, and you can actually flip this image around to sort of feature each character, facing upright. And that's just such a cool additional way to play with the balance theme. Okay, this one, Zoe's Enlightenment, I think is just such an incredible use of dithering. Like, there's just something about it. There's this kind of diagonal line style of dithering that feels so original, and it creates this really cool texture across everything. And you can also tell how this entire piece is making really great use out of that tile count efficiency too. You can kind of see those building blocks at play. Like, not in a way that feels cheap. I actually mean it in a way that it's like really masterful, and there's something that feels really authentic to the Game Boy restrictions here. And the last one here is Ritual, and this has this cool like yin-yang of these spirit sprites. And I love the dithering here as well, how it kind of like fuzzes out towards the sides of the swirl. And I saw as well, they had an alternate version, kind of like a version 2 with this, that had more detailing in this part of the piece. And I'm guessing this was maybe the original design, and maybe it ran up the tile count a bit too much and they had to kind of scale it back. but I just wanted to share this one as well so that we can all just admire the beauty of that dithering. All right, so I hope you enjoyed this look into this year's Game Boy Art Jam 1-bit edition, and we'll close out with some CRT time. So thank you for watching, and take care and keep it square.